Welcome to Motivational Mythbusters. We're here to bust some myths. I mean, we don't really care what the myths are. Basically all they do is they augment a conversation between some very, very nice people who are well heeled, well walked in life, well read, and we have amazing guests on the show like the one we have on today, Jim Comer, who's a very good friend of mine and been associated with Jim for a number of years now. He's based in Texas. But let me not do any palaver about, in the minds and the hearts and what we're doing and, all of this sort of... Let's just bring the guests on and get stuck into this informational discussion about caregiving. Guys, are you all there? Let me see your beautiful faces. There we are.
Hey, Terry.
G'day.
Welcome,
hi, mate.
Welcome to Australia, Jim. G'day, mate.
I want to hear a hi, y'all there.
Okay. Hey, y'all. Hey, y'all. I thought
it'd be more likely g'day, mate.
Yeah, well, I thought Jim would have his Texas hat on. His big. What do they call those big Texas hats?
Well, there's a 10-gallon hat. That's the one.
That's the one. Hoss Cartwright from the Virginian, right?
There you go.
Or the Duke.
Bonanza.
Okay, so let's go, because I want to use every minute we can today, because it's such an important... We're dancing and skirting around subjects such as dementia, Alzheimer's, things that happen, or we all get a sort of a touch of these things in our lives, whether they're from friends, family, associates, or whatever it may be. We're all going to be touched in some way. We just thought it would be a fantastic opportunity to bring someone in that's had an experience. Jim's not an expert in this field, but he has written a book around his own experiences of living with his parents, who I'll let him tell the story. So, Jim, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and give the audience a sort of a refresh of where you came from and where you are now? Okay, so we, as usual with this show, we've got a couple of, you might call them technical issues. When we went to your single screen, Jim, we couldn't hear you. So I'm probably going to have to ask you to do that again, mate. We'll just stay on the 4 screen. Hello, gentlemen. Unfortunately, Jim's audio got muted. Yeah, we just, we realised that. So give us that again, Jim. Sorry, mate.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I was one of those people who went to New York to be rich and famous as an actor. And as we all know, not many people achieve that, and I was not one of them. So I began to do some writing, wrote for the New York Times and Washington Post, did a crazy book called How to Survive a Roommate that got me on a big TV show, and ended up writing for corporations. And I began working for Avon Products and wrote for their CEO and began doing some coaching of executives, and even got a chance to write a monologue for the legendary Bob Hope, who appeared at one of our conferences. And I had been doing that speech coaching work for about 20 years when my caregiving days began in 1996.
Fantastic. So you have a number of myths for us today, but before we do that, we're just going to bring up, Lawrie, if you want to maybe preface this chart that you found during your research and maybe start proceedings off.
Sure, Terry. Just as a starting point, this is the leading cause of deaths globally, and you probably can't see it very well on the screen there, but at number 7 of leading causes of death, and it's just under, on the chart, it shows that at just under 2 million people per year. Leading cause of death, number 7, is Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And so I found that to be quite a fascinating because right now we're getting almost every day we are being bombarded with the media talking about the COVID thing. But of course, there's all these other things that are going on. People are passing away from all sorts of things, chronic heart disease being absolute number 1 and by a long shot. and strokes at number 2. But there it sits at 7. And just a little bit of a very small amount of information off the WHO website says in 2019, Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia ranked as the 7th leading cause of death, and women are disproportionately affected. Globally, 65% of deaths from Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia are women. Now, I found that to be fascinating, and in the, digging into a little bit of the background of these degenerative disease, I couldn't find a lot more on it. There are lots of types of dementia, Terry and team, and I thought it was just a good place to start. So it is very, very prominent, particularly in the Western world.
Ross, can I be bold and a bit naughty at the same time? Because I know that's what we're here to talk about, is about caregiving, but I don't actually think we've done Jim justice. The man just said that he wrote jokes for Bob Hope. Me as a kid growing up, watching Bob Hope on television was like, wow. And the guy used to, I know my parents loved him, my grandparents loved him, and so did I. And we're speaking to Jim, who actually wrote jokes for the man. How did that actually come about, Jim? Can I just throw that in?
Yeah, it was very funny. I had read that he loved to do material about the specific audience that he was speaking to. And so I knew this audience because they were the ones I'd been writing sales meetings for, 3,000 district managers. So I took all the stuff that upset them greatly, all the things they were upset about and mad about. I wrote a monologue about all their griefs. I put it on the teleprompter when he came in for his dress rehearsal. None of the executives knew this was happening. And he looked at them, he read them over, and he said, very nice, young man. I don't understand them, because they were very in jokes. He took me back to his hotel suite, and I explained each joke in detail. He still didn't understand them. He said, okay, I will do one joke, and if it gets a laugh, I'll do all of them. And I gave him I said, just the first joke. It's the thing they're most upset about. He did the joke that night. The people screamed and yelled and beat the floor. He did all 12 jokes, and it was the single biggest impact of the entire 3-day conference. They talked about that monologue for years. So it was my favorite thing I ever wrote in my life.
In my inimitable fashion, we've borrowed Bob Hope's name in Australia here, and we use it for something else. And it's it's something that's legalized over in America at the moment, but we call dope Bob Hope over here. We call everything by different names, but I just thought I'd mention that because I think that's bloody hilarious. One of the things that I was blown away with was, in fact, that Jim had written for Bob Hope, because I'm the same vintage as you, Pete, right? I think I'm a little bit younger, at least it looks like it anyway. Bob Hope was one of my heroes as well, Bing and Bob.
Well, the beautiful thing is that for me, my parents loved him and my grandparents loved him. And one of the things we're talking about caregiving, we're talking about how important, people are in our lives, and, what we've witnessed and role models and what we've shared and how we've learnt and grown together. And, Bob Hope for me was, he was on the top of the pedestal. And I was giggling when you said you wrote a book called How to Survive a Roommate. So I think bubbling underneath the surface of the caregiver is a gentleman with a genuine sense of humour. So we'll get to talk about that maybe another day, Jim. But
yes,
much more.
You'd be amazed as well by you often see Hollywood actors just go by the wayside, and a lot of those people have had dementia. I mean, there's a number of big name people that ended up with dementia. I'm not going to go into that.
Boy.
It's an incredibly. It doesn't. It doesn't segregate and say, well, you're going to get it and you're going to get it. As we were talking, we're trying to work out before whether there had been some work done around genetics and whether it was genetically kind of given that you're going to get it, who gets it and who doesn't get it. But let's move on. So, Jim, you've got 4 myths that you want to bust today, which is, we were looking for a one.
Absolutely. And the first myth I've got that I want to puncture is being a good caregiver requires lots of training and experience. And that is absolutely not the case. And my own experience is a perfect example of that. In 1996, I was living in Los Angeles. I was writing for a CEO. 7 o'clock one morning, I'm sound asleep. And the phone rings, and it is my parents' next door neighbor in Dallas, Texas. She has never called me in 30 years. I am instantly awake. And she says, Jim, your daddy is walking around and he looks like he's in a daze and he's in the front of the house. I think he's having a stroke. Well, I hung up from her. I called home and I tried to get mother to get dad on the phone. And he was in the background yelling and he would not come to the phone. And in that moment, I realized he probably was having a stroke. And indeed he was. And in that moment, my life, it was like a click. My life just changed forever. And within less than 10 hours, I was on a plane to Dallas. And fortunately, they had wonderful neighbors. They got my father into the car to go to the hospital by telling him he was going for Mexican food. Because in Texas, you can get almost anybody to do anything if you tell them they're going for Mexican food.
Jim, was there any warning? Had he been predisposed?
No warning
to
at all. He was in perfect health.
Came from nowhere.
He was 88 years old, but he had no big health problems, none. And so I get there. By the time I get there, he's had more of a stroke. He couldn't walk. He couldn't talk. He wasn't able to use his bodily functions. He had all these tubes come out. I walk into the hospital, and they're all family, and not family, but friends and neighbors and people from our church. And they're looking at me like, oh, thank God. Here's the man with all the answers. Well, I didn't even know the questions. But boy, I had to know them fast because mother didn't even understand what was happening with her early dementia. And the doctors told me he had 1 week in this intensive care hospital, and then he was gone. I had to have him into rehab within a week. And the problem was we had no family in Dallas. Our family was in Austin, 200 miles south. So I had to get him to Austin for rehab so he'd have some support from the family. So, I mean, right away, that's my first duty as a caregiver. I flew down to Austin 2 or 3 days later. My cousins met me. We went to 4 rehabs in a row. I didn't have any idea what a rehab should look like. You know how I picked one? A nurse smiled at me at St. David's. I literally chose it because of a smile. Yeah. And she told me that they would be sending an ambulance up to Dallas to get my father and bring him down to Austin. So I come home that night. I tell my mother, yay, we've got a place for dad. And then she says to me in her sweet Southern Belle way, she said, now, Jim, that's fine for daddy, but not me. I am staying right here in Dallas. I am not going anywhere. Well, of course, she didn't know that she couldn't be by herself. Dad had taken over everything. So I had to find, this is where improvisation first came in with me. I had to find a way to get my mother to Austin where my cousins would take care of her the same day Dad was going down in the ambulance. And I bet everything on one lie. I called it therapeutic lying. On Saturday and Sunday, before he was going down on Monday, I packed for my mother, and I had no idea how to pack for my mother, but I did it. And on Monday morning, I bet everything on this. I came to her at 8:30 in the morning. She's at the little dining room table drinking her coffee. I said, Mother, would you like to go get some ice cream? You see, my mother never, ever turns down ice cream. And sure enough, I was right. She brightened, she stood up, and she walked with me out of the house, into the car, got into the car, and we drove away from her home of 34 years, and she never saw it again.
Wow.
Now, I don't want you to think I'm a bad guy here, because I stopped at the first Dairy Queen we came to. I stopped, got her the gooeyest chocolate sundae you can imagine, and we headed for the freeway for Austin. And I kept waiting for her to say something. Where are we going? She never said it. Because of her dementia, she was busy talking about the color of passing cars. We went the whole 2.5 hours, not a word. And I got her to my cousins, kissed her goodbye, and headed for the airport to go back to my job in LA. Now that is what's called a quick immersion into the improvisation that is at the heart of caregiving.
And this is quite common, Jim, right? This happens. These kind of, I mean, dementia. I know caregiving, or when dementia's coming on, you can kind of see things people are doing differently, and it might be a twitch, or in my experience that I've had two experiences with it, and I've found that my father's second wife, she started doing this thing with her lips, like that, and I said to my dad, "What's Geraldine doing with her lips?" He goes, I haven't noticed it." And I said, "Wow," because she's like, and within 6 months she was gone, absolutely, in a caring hospital, and not there anymore. And it was a shock to all of us. It was an absolute shock, because there are so many things involved in here. There was a house involved, there was a car, there were assets, and my father was no longer being with her, and the kids in the family wanted to sell the house, and my father didn't own all of the house, and they wanted to cut him out completely. So there are all these things. So it's quite common, right? It's quite a common thing.
Oh, absolutely. It varies so greatly. Some people go very fast, a year and a half. My mother was almost 20 years. So this was in the first 3 or 4 years. This was 96. She began showing some little signs of memory loss in 92, but nothing. She was so charming and funny, and she was able to fake it. And my father, covered for her. He was in super denial, so he covered for her. So when I showed up, I realized she had problems, but I had no idea until I moved to Texas how bad the problems were. And she didn't have any physical attributes of it. It was just that she would repeat herself and some of those kinds of things. But hers took a long time, almost 20 years.
So Shiv is one of our regular listeners. He's asked, isn't being locked down aiding to this? Lawrie and Peter, do you want to maybe chime in here and bring us your thoughts?
Says, I think we're going to get smashed for time, and Jim's got 4 myths, and I'm so keen for him to take this journey forward, because I think a lot of these questions will be answered, even like the decision making now that he's involved in. I'm assuming that that you were making the decisions, and you had cousins in Texas, but you had to fly home. But
what happened, and I was about to tell you, because I flew home after that first 11 days, and I'd gotten Dad in rehab. That was the big deal, and I'd gotten Mother with my cousin. So I had done the 2 big things I needed to do for that trip. But then I realized I needed to go back 2 weeks later and check on my dad, see how he was doing, right? And I walked into the rehab 2 weeks later, and there he was. Still couldn't talk, couldn't walk, had tubes going everywhere, and a catheter, which was driving him crazy. And when he saw me come into his room, I can see this like it was yesterday. His eyes were good and his mind was good. He saw me and he forced out 3 words. He said, "Get me pills." And I knew from the look on his face exactly what kind of pills he wanted me to get him. He wanted me to get pills that would help him end his life. He did not want to be there if this was the way it was going to be. Now, on top of everything, my father was half deaf. And he wouldn't wear hearing aids. And so I had to yell back. I said, "Dad, I can't do that. I'll go to jail." And then he said, "I don't care." I said, No, not hell, Dad, jail. And he didn't care. He just wanted me to get those for him, and he didn't care if I went to jail or hell, but I wasn't going to do it. So I went to the doctor, and I said, "Is there anything we can do to get his bodily functions back? Let him pee again?" And he said, "Well, we could do an operation on his prostate, and it might do it." And I said, "Let's try." I got Dad to sign for it. They did the operation. 2 weeks later, he could pee on his own. And suddenly he wanted to live. That one thing had made all the difference in him wanting to be alive. So that's, again, another example of improvisation. I didn't know what I was doing. I just figured if we can get him peeing, we're going to be a lot better off.
So, Jim, what I'm hearing is that's probably leading towards the next myth, is that there's no right way of doing this, is there? You know, you are improvising.
No.
So the
So
first myth
second
you
myth,
spoke
Jim?
about was that you required training. Well, there's clearly no training. It's thrust upon you. Then as we move forward to myth number 2 is really about the fact that you're winging it, aren't you?
You're winging it. Myth number 2 is myth number 2 is that, there is no one right way to do this. There's your way, and you've got to just do that on your own. Obviously, I ask a lot of questions. I had a lot of people I was getting input from, but when it comes down to decisions like, trying to do an operation on his prostate, my gut level told me if he could pee, he's going to be happier.
So can I ask you then, when you go down this path, you're talking about there's no training, there's no right way. So is there a way that we can ready ourselves for this, in an aging population? And is it a silly question to ask about preparation?
Yeah, it is. It's a good one. I think that the most important thing that families can do, and it's a family thing, is just the opposite of what my dad and I did. Because you see, Mother was not part of the discussion about what do we do when we're older. When Mother started having problems about 4 years before Dad's stroke, and they were little problems, but they got bigger. And as I began to hear from relatives that she was writing the same letter 3 or 4 times, and that she got lost in the neighborhood and had to quit driving, and as things kept going that way, I began to question my father. When I would come home at Christmas or in the summer to see them, I would question him and say, Dad, what's going on? And I would suggest, don't you think it's time to maybe move down to Austin where you can be close to the relatives? And he was in total 100% denial.
Yeah.
So certainly for us, in fact, so he was in such denial that when I would bring up something like selling the house or Mother's health, he would literally get up and walk out of the room. But Jim, what I know now is that I should have followed him. I should have cornered him and said, Dad, we need to go get Mama and have her have a complete physical with an expert and a specialist and find out what's going on. But I was being the good Southern boy, the good Texas boy. And I wasn't. I get by with that.
But these are uncomfortable conversations, aren't they? But these are what you're saying to us, is that these are must-have conversations. My situation.
What I say in my book, and I talk about in the speech, is that it's so important to have what I call the conversation, but it's really a series of conversations. The adult children should get together. Maybe it's on a holiday or when they're all together, and sit down with the parents, take a whole afternoon and talk about what they want and what they don't want as they age. What are their plans? What would they like to do? What would happen? This could be if you're really going to deal with it early, you could even start this talk in the 60s, because we don't know when problems are going to, but certainly by the 70s, you need to have had a talk with your parents about what they want and don't want and what they can afford. Yeah. Because I don't know what it's like in Australia, but the independent living, the assisted living, the skilled nursing are very expensive here, and the governments do not pay for them.
We are much better off here, Jim. We are much better off here. I just wanted to bring a point in on something you said before about going to the doctor. In the experiences I've had, especially in the early stages, what doctors are tending to do, and personally I don't trust doctors. I'd much rather go to the hospital to see a doctor, but I don't like to go to a day surgery to see a doctor that's just churning out the numbers to get you through, that deals in colds and stuff. But that's what happened. This person went to the doctor and they give them something, I don't know if it's Prozac or something like that, but they give them one of these mind-numbing prescription drugs that tends to sort of, put them on their back and stuff like that. So I think they struggle as well with diagnosis. Is this something you've come across, Jim, or how were the doctors?
Well, with my dad, we were lucky because another funny story. About a month after he'd gotten into rehabs, I'm still, of course, in California, and one day I get a call from the head of the rehab, the administrator, and he says, "Jim, I hate to tell you this, but I'm going to have to ask your father to leave. He's been cursing at the nurses." And I went, "What? My father? He's a Sunday school teacher." "I don't care. He's been cursing at the nurses, and we are asking him to leave. You've got 1 week to find a new place for him." My dad was expelled from rehab. So I have to fly back. By this time, mother is driving my cousins crazy a little bit, and they haven't said anything, but I know she is. So I'm trying to find a place for both of them. I've got 2 days. I come in on a Friday, and I need to find a place by Monday to get them in skilled nursing for him, and assisted living for her. And this is a miracle, because I was able to find the only place in town that had that, and they had openings for the next Monday, and I got them both in. And once they got there, they were together, which was good. And then Dad began to take it seriously. And over the next 4 months, he had a complete recovery. He was 88. He came back 100% from his stroke. He was walking, talking, and telling me how to drive just like he always did.
Wow.
So that was like, and then they got into independent living that fall. So as far as families, though, it's so important for people to have the conversation and get parents talking about what they want and what they don't want. You're telling me that the cost factor is not a big deal in Australia?
It's better. It's still there. I mean, you still have to pay for, palliative care and that sort of stuff. Or if you want someone to be there full time for a parent, or you can, they've got a scheme here that you can give them your house or something like that, and you'll get, according to the value of your house, you'll get put in a facility which is either 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star.
I see. Well, that's somewhat the way it is here. Yeah. But as you probably know, our medical system here is, how do I use this without using a curse word? Not good.
Fucked. I'll do it for you. I'll do it for you. And that's true. And I think that's quite common around the world, Jim. We certainly have got, massive problems here, but I know in America, for God's sake, don't go to America and get your leg broken. Otherwise, you need to take a small mortgage out. Lawrie, just interested in your thoughts, because I know you've been very quiet today, considering you're the biggest chatterbox on the show. I'm sure Peter will back me up on that when Loz gets going. And today he's like the church mouse sitting in the corner. From your perspective, mate, as someone who hasn't been touched with the caregiver stick, let's call it the caregiver stick, your turn. We're all going to get a go. Trust me. It'll probably be me, Loz. You'll probably be feeding me with a spoon somewhere down the track, mate. I'll be giving you a call up. How is this sort of sitting with you? I mean, are you surprised or shocked, or some of the things that Jim's been saying?
Thank you for including me in that. I'm sitting back and I'm really quite shocked and surprised. I mean, looking from 10,000 feet as I have, I've seen it manifest in many ways through films and different things, and so I kind of understand the concept of it, but I don't understand the experience that Jim has had, where you are literally changing. You're turning 180 degrees and doing things that you were never entertained. Jim, when you were, in your job, which I'm sure you love doing and challenged by it and all of those things that are very Western driven, the things that we grow up, getting a career or getting a good job and getting good money, and all of those we think are important things. And for me, living and traveling through Asia and seeing a different family dynamic where parents are always at the forefront of the children coming up, from my experience looking at it. And in the West, that's not necessarily the case. It's like parents will rear you leave home and you go and you do your thing. And then you come back in and say hello to them every so often. In my own experience, quite honestly, I was so caught up in my career that I didn't see, before Dad passed, I didn't get to see him very often. And then when Mum passed, I didn't see her at all, which is, would seem quite sad for a lot of people, but didn't have very close relationships. So I see this family values thing coming through in this, and I didn't have much of that growing up. But the challenge of looking after someone and not knowing really what to do, because I'm just looking through here, gentlemen. I've got what are the 7 stages of dementia? While Jim was talking and I was listening, I was just reading through them. And stage 1 is no cognitive decline. You're normal. You're a normal functioning person. But stage 2, it says stage 2 is used to describe normal forgetfulness. Things that as you get older, you go, where are those keys? My wife Susan and I are always going. She's going, where are the keys? Where is this? Where's that? Or I'm doing the same. You forget little things.
Yeah, you go to the fridge. You go to the fridge and you go, what am I doing here?
What am I doing here? And it says that symptoms are not evident to loved ones, family, or the patient's physician. So in other words, you're not seeing anything at this stage. You're not really noticing anything. And it's put down to you just getting older. So for instance, my wife and I are quite often laughing to one another going, that we're getting hit with old age because these things are popping up a little more often than not. Well, then it gets a little bit more than that. It says mild cognitive decline. No dementia yet, but things are moving along a little bit. What was a one-off thing or a two-off thing is now more often, and then it gets deeper and deeper and deeper in it. So I'm sitting here listening, and I'm wondering about the whole thing. I really am wondering about it. And Jim, I'm so
and Lawrie, those vary tremendously, as I said. Some of them go very fast down that, and as with my mother, very slow. But one of the things I do want to make sure I get in there, and we're about to skip over it. I want to talk about the whole idea of you don't have to be a perfect, quote, quote, perfect caregiver. You can make mistakes, and that making mistakes is a part of it. Because I tried doing this from California for 6 months, flying back, frequently, and I realized things were happening so fast I couldn't really do what I thought needed to be done from 1,000 miles. I just didn't think I could. And we didn't know if Dad would have another stroke. I didn't know how fast Mother's dementia would pass along. So I decided 6 months in to quit my job, which I liked, and leave my friends and church and all. But I just felt that was the right thing to do. And as we mentioned earlier, I had great role models in my parents because they had taken care of their parents and some what we call old maid aunts that didn't have anybody. My parents took care of a lot of people. And so when it was my turn, there was just no question in my mind that this was what I needed to do. I didn't think it was a big deal. I just thought it was the right thing to do. So I show up in Texas in October of '96. I come in my U-Haul, and I very soon saw that I did not have any idea how deeply my mother was into dementia. Because from a distance, if you're coming twice a year for a week or two, you don't see the full deal.
Right. So
right away, by this time they're in independent living, and Mother has got 60 dresses in her closet, and she's only wearing 5 of them. And I went, Mom, why aren't you wearing more of your clothes? I mean, I gave you that. And she said, Jim, most of those things in there are stolen. You want me to go to jail? You want me to go be arrested? She really thought that if she wore the dresses in her own closet, she would be arrested. That was a shock for me. Wow. And then came the moment that changed everything for me. One day she said to me, Jim, I would like to go see my sister in Smithville, which is about 60 miles away. And that would be a very logical request, except for one thing. Her sister had been dead for 8 years. And of course, me being a brand new caregiver, a rookie, I made a big mistake. I said, Mama, you can't go see Estelle. She's in heaven. And that was like brand new news to my mother. She started crying, sobbing, tears coming down. She cried for 15 minutes. And I'm going, what did I do? I just told the truth. And so the next day I went to see an Alzheimer's expert. I got an emergency appointment. And I went into her and I said, I don't know how to do this. And she said, honey, from what I hear, you don't have much choice. And then she said, here's the deal. Quit trying to drag your mother into your world. She can't go there anymore. You have got to go into her world. Go into her world. That was the best advice I ever got about caregiving. And I started doing it that instant. And I did it for the next 14 years. I made it a point, wherever mother was, that's where I was. Now, and as I said, her disease progressed slowly. So she was still charming and funny for a few years. But as her disease grew and her memory lessened, I managed to go right there with it. And maybe 8 years later, one day I came in to see her and she didn't know who I was for the first time.
Jim, just to that, can I ask you a question? I have two friends of mine, and their mother passed away not so long ago at about the age of 96, but she'd had dementia for the last 7 or 8 years. And the two boys, they used to go together. Every Tuesday, they would sit with the mum. The mum loved my friend, but his older brother, who she'd loved them both pre-dementia. But when she had dementia, she liked one son more than she liked the other son. She said that the other son, he always looked grumpy. Why don't you ever smile? But she thought that my friend, the younger son, she thought at one stage she thought was her husband, lover. She went through the whole. She went through the whole gambit, which we learned to laugh at and with because we had to. But did your mum like you at least?
Oh, here's what I was just about to say. You know what? The day that happened, the day that she didn't know who I was, she looked at me with just this look of total. I realized in that moment I had a choice right there. I could either get my feelings hurt, which would be ridiculous. So here's what I did. I put my hand out, shook her hand, said, Jim Comer, your firstborn, how are you? And just shook her hand and smiled. And pretty soon she was smiling back. And whoever this person was, she liked me. And I did that for the rest of her life. I just kept reintroducing myself. And
it's sad. It's sad on the one hand, isn't it, Jim? Because that's your mum. But I get the way you move into her world.
I was expecting that would happen at some point. I mean, there'd been enough changes. I knew that was coming. And the day that it came, I just used my sense of humor and just went like, bless her heart, as we say in Texas. And, and then a few years later, she could no longer make full sentences. So I would pick whatever word seemed to be a key word, and I'd go with that word. And what I would do was try to do for her what I knew she loved. She loved to go out into the garden and exclaim over the flowers, even when it was 95 degrees. And so I would take her out to the garden, even though I didn't want to go, because she loved it. And of course I would buy her ice cream because I knew she loved that. And she liked my singing. So I would sing to her. So between ice cream, singing, and the flowers, those were things I knew she loved.
We were talking about this earlier, Jim, with my experience with my father, who I'm pretty sure I haven't said it on air, but he found love at 87 or something like that with a lady that's not too dissimilar in age, and they're like a pair of teenage kids. But he's still there. He just can't get his words out. But he's definitely, in the early stages of either Alzheimer's, dementia. We're not sure, and the doctors aren't sure either. But you just mentioned then love, music, all of those things. It's amazing how much power they have when you're dealing with something like dementia. It can make a huge difference to the individual. Has that been your experience?
Oh, absolutely, because anything that brings them closer to warmth and caring, I think that connects at a level that we don't even know. I'm not sure we can even describe it, but I think it's true. I think there've been studies showing that animals, dogs, pets, bringing those into into caregiving situations always seems to give people more life, more happiness, and children. They love to see children. My mother, oh my gosh, she loved children. I mean, I can remember once we were in the lobby, and I would bring my father, who couldn't hear, with my mother, who couldn't remember, and I would try to bring them together. Not a lot of communication happened, but they knew each other and all that. So we're sitting there one day, and there's a big family with a newborn. I mean, a small baby there. And my mother looked at that baby, and all of a sudden, by this time she's broken a hip. She's in a wheelchair. She scooted that wheelchair over to the other family and went right up to the baby and was trying to get the baby. And I had to go over and explain how much she loved it. And they were so sweet. They understood completely what was going on, and they let her hold the baby, and it just made her feel good. And I still remember that moment. It's funny. I hadn't thought of that in 10 years.
I think we also, all of us, and I'm not sure whether you thought about this, Loz. I know you're so quiet today. I thought I'd pop this one to you. I mean, I think to myself, when's it going to happen to me? I mean, obviously it happened to my father pretty late, but there is a little bit of history in my family. Lawrie, yourself, do you think to yourself, what happens when I don't know anymore? How do you think this affects us personally? I mean, I'm not hugely worried about it, but I'm just wondering how you've framed it, Lawrie.
I've never really thought about it, to be honest, Terry. To be brutally honest, I pretty much live in the moment. And that is, I do my best to try to be here as much as possible and not get ahead of myself. That's not to say that I'm not really taking some notes here on what Jim's saying, and just occasionally glancing over to the stuff that I've got on the side here. And it's got me thinking about it a great deal, and wondering also, how, if there's any way of reducing the potential for it to occur. That's what's coming in my mind, but that's just the way I think. And then I'm also thinking, I'm listening to Jim going, what an incredible and extraordinary experience it is. And the word that keeps popping into my head is humanity, is the humanity of it. The fact that it gets down to this very basic level of being human. So all this superficial stuff that has driven us through our life, it ceases to matter anymore. Because at the end of the day, I'm caring for a loved one, and helping to guide them to wherever they end up going to.
Okay.
So I keep hearing humanity in this all the time.
Ross, can I say, to your point that you've just made now, if our, wonderful supporters of this show took something away, I mean, obviously Jim's message is so, it's so important, but sometimes we're waiting for something to happen before we take care of people who matter in our lives. And maybe this whole thing around kindness and caring. I mean, touch wood, I'm blessed. My dad's 91, my mum's 88. I was sharing with Jim before the show, and I feel so blessed that they have all their faculties about them. But I speak to them every day. I tell them I love them every day. I'm not waiting for something to happen. I mean, I'm husband, father, grandfather, as you know, and the people in my life matter. But we're all a work in progress and need to be focused on getting better at it all of the time, and not be waiting for something to happen before we show an act of kindness. And Peter Thurin speak, I know, but these things are easy to do, but they're also easy not to do. And we have to start looking at those little things that we can implement that make a difference in other people's lives.
I'm certainly a work in progress. Just ask Peter Thurin. Now, I've got a couple of things, just a couple of things here, because we've got 2 myths left. Is that correct, Jim?
Well, I don't even know where we are in the myths. I've got 2 things I want to add, whether they're in the myths. And let's see.
The myths.
Number 4. Myths. Here's a myth I want to share. We are going to live together. Together. We are going to live forever. Too often, families and there's people in their 70s and even their 80s act as if they're going to live forever. I've talked about it before the show. I mentioned the fact that in America, only 3 out of 10 Americans have a will. That means 7 out of 10 don't have one, and yet 10 out of 10 are going to die.
Yeah.
I ask this when I speak to groups, and they'll put their hands up, and there'll always be a big group there in the auditorium that doesn't have a will. And I don't understand that. It's just
Jim, can I
basic
ask,
denial.
sorry, mate, can I ask, why do you think that is? What, in your experience?
I think it's
why-
denial. I think that the people
denial,
they
okay.
think that if they go ahead and get the will, that means I really am going to die. Of course, they're really going to die with or without the will. What they're doing is a very unkind thing to their family. Because as we all know, if you don't have a will, when you die, it is a mess for your family. And why would anybody want to do that as their last act? I mean, you look at Aretha Franklin, $80 million in money that she had at the end. That was her leftover amount, and she got 5 kids, and they've been fighting about it for 5 years.
Yeah, well, on a smaller note, my father had the same experience. I mean, he was second marriage, and the kids wanted. I mean, his wife got Alzheimer's, and within 6 months she was in a care facility because she could no longer function outside, and the kids my dad needed somewhere to stay, but the kids wanted to sell the house. So there was a big fight there. It causes a lot of problems when someone loses their facility, thinking and their facilities and all of that. There is so much there that can cause massive upheaval in a family if it's not taken care of, as Jim's saying now. So what's your advice, Jim, for people?
The advice is that you want to talk. It's important for us to have wills ourselves, because if the adult children all have wills, then that gives them more clout when they go to the parents and say, we really need to get this done, please. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be complicated, depending on their estate, but it needs to be done. And it's an act of kindness. And if they put it that way, maybe it will get through to the parents, but it doesn't always. And so often people die intestate, which means with no will. And it's just a disaster. And it is stunned. Look at Prince, $250 million estate, $250 million, no will.
Wow.
It's just
Jeez.
It's stunning. So I really urge people to get wills and what we call here powers of attorney. Do you have that there?
Yeah, we do.
Having somebody act in your place in healthcare and somebody to act in durable powers of attorney and legal matters. That's also really important. And also the living will, which says, what do you want as far as, do you want to donate part of your body to science? All the things that you want. Do you want to have a cremation? Do you want to have buried? All the things that people think, oh, well, they'll do what I want. Well, no, they won't. Not if you don't have it written down. And so those are all important things to do.
Jim, can I just say, just because the conversation will probably go sideways a little bit, but I actually made notes when you spoke about those 4 myths, and I just want to summarize and make sure that we've got them. The first myth was that being a good caregiver requires training and experience. Well, it clearly does not. Myth number 2,
it does not.
Do it right. Or you're a failure. Well, as you clearly articulated,
you have to do it right or you're a failure, and that is totally not true.
Right. Number 3 is that there is no way to prepare for caregiving, and you've clearly said, yes, there is a way to prepare. For goodness sakes, let's talk about it and talk about it now. So there's
the conversation. The earlier you start talking about things, the better off you'll be.
No, I love it. And you've just really...
First of all, let's just be real clear about it. We're talking about anybody living a long time. My parents, your parents, many people die in their 60s and 70s, and some even in their 50s. So it's an earlier conversation is not a bad thing to have.
Plus, we are getting older now. You know, obviously, back in the days when they chop your leg off and you die of gangrene, or there's no antibiotics or something. Now we're keeping people alive longer. So,
definitely.
There are so many issues around this, because I know, Jim, when we did a campaign for you, and one of the common themes for the people that we were talking to, because Jim gives keynotes, he's got a fantastic keynote around this subject, and it really is something that the people who are being touched by dementia, by Alzheimer's, and who are forced into a caregiving situation, they do struggle with it, as Jim did, as I'm struggling with it now. But one of the continuing themes through all of the companies that we talked to was they don't have enough money. We don't have funding. I mean, this is obviously something that's sort of been left by the wayside, right? While we're investing in coal and coal power plants or whatever, the caregiving side of things is still struggling, as I'm sure it is in America.
Well, in America, the top 20% of the population, maybe 25, that may be stretching it, are the ones that can afford these really nice caregiving, retirement homes, independent living, assisted living. They are not being built for the poorer people or even the middle class. They're building them pretty much here for the top 25%. And so most people, let's be real clear about this, are going to get their caregiving at home.
Yes.
And they're going to get it through family caregivers, which is what I've been talking about. So don't get fooled by all those luxurious things going up. They're for the smaller number, because most people can't afford $10,000 a month or even $8,000.
Jim, one of our listeners, sent a question through earlier, Shiv. Just before I bring that up, the last myth was that clearly that
I'm sorry.
We're going to live forever. Well, we're clearly not going to live forever.
We're going to live forever. So I don't need to make all these decisions now.
For sure. Shiv earlier in the program sent through, he said, but in challenging times, lockdown and so on, the challenges are exacerbated, aren't they, Jim?
Oh, well, it's funny because last summer, when I had thought, well, I won't be doing any speaking for a year, I got calls from two places where I had given my full keynote on caregiving about 5 years ago. And in both cases, these people's clients, the caregivers who were their clients, were all stuck at home and they couldn't see their people, their parents or their loved ones who were in communities that were closed. So they were trying to give their own caregivers some inspiration and some humor. And they asked me to do this speech on Zoom. And I was not at all sure it would work because I couldn't see their faces and I couldn't hear the laughter, and there wasn't that. But I stood up here in this room and I did the thing, and it worked. For Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and upstate New York. And so that was a surprise to me.
So Jim, if any of our listeners out there want to book you, you will do a virtual from America?
Oh, absolutely. They told me that it did well. So I mean, my thing is I love the laughter. I love the interaction, which you just don't get during a Zoom talk. But they're telling me it did work, and I love doing them. It's great.
So Michelle's just brought up your contact details there. So LinkedIn, there's Jim, comacommunications.com.
Yeah, that's a good one to get me. Jim at comacommunications.com.
Yep, parentingyourparents.com, and they're up there anyway. So the people will be able to copy those down or whatever.
Jim, can I throw to you? I think really, really important. What I'm taking away from this, and I just want to throw this back at you because I'm taking. Clearly, we're speaking as Jim as the caregiver. But three things that I'm really taking from here that for me I can implement in my life. The first thing is that starting anything new, there's going to be a learning curve. Whether it's as a caregiver or anything that we do in our lives, there's a learning curve. And we are, point number two, going to make mistakes. Well, mistakes, that's the feedback we get that leads to an opportunity, for the third point of this, an opportunity to grow. So there's a learning curve, clearly. We are going to make mistakes, but ultimately that leads to growth.
Oh, one of the things, I'm glad you said that, because for me, I didn't want to end this without telling you and the listeners how much I got from this. It sounded like I was the big giver, but I feel like I was really the big getter, because here's 14 years, I got a chance to put other people first. And my whole life, trying to be rich and famous in New York and LA, it had been about me. And all of a sudden, it wasn't about me, it was about them. And that was a great gift. Great gift for me. I mean, I won't say I got to be unselfish, but I got into the suburbs of unselfishness. I began to experience a little bit of what that was like. And so for me to be able to to do for others and to give back and to experience that. It made me a better person. There's no question about that. It made me a better person.
Can you see that comment there, Jim? Shiv's just said, Jim, you've just helped me serve better. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shiv. I appreciate that. Yeah. So I'm grateful for that. And my mother she had a great sense of humor, and she used to say, long ago, she used to say to people, you know how much it cost me to stay in the hospital when Jim was born at Seton Hospital? You know how much it cost me? $4 a day. And he was worth every penny of it. Well, I had 14 years to pay back that $4 investment.
Wow,
and I did the best.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Mate, I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and I know that you're in Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas.
But I hope you can feel a massive hug coming all the way from here to there. It's about 11 o'clock at night for you, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for us, mate. But huge hug, mate. I hope you can feel it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all.
We're so grateful.
And Peter and Terry, thanks so much.
Yeah, look, I mean, Lawrie and Peter are just a joy to work with. If you want to get in touch with Peter, peterthurin.com. If you want to get in touch with Lawrie, don't bother. He's an absolute recluse. No, I'm only joking, Loz. Laurie's actually moving from Perth, where he's been doing some... I mean, Laurie's an amazing guy. He's the head coach for... which country, Lawrie?
Oh, well, I was in Indonesia.
Indonesia, so he does a lot of stuff.
Helping them up there.
But Lawrie works with very high-end sports people, and
really?
Yeah, just talk to me about a relationship he's had for 21 years with a gentleman who's just taken over a very large financial firm that's just grassrooted themselves in Australia. And, Laurie's had a lot to play with. So Laurie's the same as you two guys. He's a keynote speaker and that sort of stuff, but...
check that out.
Yeah. You can go to mindonthegame.com. Is that site still being under construction, Lawrie? Have you got it back?
Yeah, it's still. I haven't done anything with it yet, Terry. I'm still just it'll get there when it gets there.
So this is an ongoing thing with Lawrie, and I've been managing Lawrie as a speaker for 11 years now, and he's had a hiatus for the last 8. And every time we have a conversation, so you come back, but we could have him back soon because he's moving back to the Gold Coast, where Lawrie and I used to watch whales while we do work and try and work out why Ovations and ICMI and all those other speaker bureaus weren't booking him. There you go.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's what we're
You
doing.
brought that up this morning, and I'd forgotten all about the whales. I've got a lovely apartment, looks over the ocean, and we would sit out there and just watch the whales go past.
He has a great coffee machine at home as well, so we'd just be sipping, and then we'd walk down on the Gold Coast and get lunch, and then we'd go back up and do some more work, and then
it was pretty special.
And then that big financial crisis hit, mate, and we went, "Whoa, what happened there?"
Let me just take briefly say, Jim, from my point of view. I have got an enormous amount out of this. This is something I needed in my life. I've been somewhat of a maverick and just going out there doing my thing for a long time. And I'm really thinking about this. I'm going to sit down and have a chat with Susie when she gets home later on, my wife, about this. There are only really the two of us. She has some family. I have family. I'm going to reconnect with my family when I get back to the East and do a better job of bridging the gap that has been been stretched apart. So I am so very grateful for you taking the time out of your day, your night, to come and share your experience with me. It's nothing short of enlightening for me, Jim. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and Loz, people get to choose. People get to choose what they do off the back of this show, like all of our shows. And these things are easy to do, and they are easy not to do. And we've got to make better choices moving forward. And we've got to encourage each other and hold each other to account and take heed, because that way Jim's message will have been really of value if we now start to bring it to life in our own lives.
And Jim, a good friend of ours, a Canadian friend of mine, Kevin Mumford, just said Austin, and then he's got Hook'em Horns.
I saw that Hook'em. That's UT Austin, right?
Right on.
Yeah, so he's a good guy. Very good.
In Austin.
Well, look, thank y'all for being on the show today. And could you give us a g'day, mate?
G'day.
Yeah, that's it, mate. That's it. So Once I had dinner
Work
with
on it, I'm
Jim
sure.
down in Bondi when he came over here, and the first thing he said to me was, "G'day, mate." So there you go. All right, gentlemen, have a great week. Thank you very much, Jim Comer, for coming on. I
Thanks,
know
Jim.
that we left Jim in the dark.
Thanks,
I
Jim.
enjoyed it.
He was wondering
Thank
what
you
it was
both.
all going to be
Peter,
about, but I
Lawrie.
hope you've enjoyed it. You know,
Jim,
these are
thank
great
you, buddy.
guys, and thank you very much for those who are watching us. And if you are watching us and you think we're worth watching, tell someone about us, because we'd love to have more people watching, and we'll catch you in a couple of weeks' time when we'll be talking about something or other. Have a great day, y'all.